There is a huge psyop getting run right now on the American people, and no one is talking about it. I could not resist doing this video because it is so clear and so apparent what has happened. But no one is seeing it. It is breathtaking to see. I'm going to try to cover it piece by piece in this video. Now, yesterday, I put out a video talking about these three huge stories that broke that were largely unreported. Number one, Iran and Russia creating digital currencies for the specific purpose of circumventing the sanctions on Venezuela and Iran. They are going to deal directly with Venezuela, Russia is, and Iran with Venezuela directly. We've heard this now from Turkey. We've heard this now from India. China doesn't recognize the U.S.'s sanctions. And we thought the story was, going into the elections in Venezuela, that the U.S. was not going to recognize the results of the election. They were not going to recognize Mr. Maduro because he was a dictator, right? That was the story. And they got all these people from the Lima Group and all these people from the G20 together to roundly condemn all this kind of stuff. Well, look how the story has changed and nobody is seeing it. Let me show you. Now, here is the story as being reported from Fox. Okay, Utah man incarcerated in Venezuela, jailed to be released, Trump says. Now, the headline of this at one time said, this miracle release, with virtually no mention of Bob Corker's trip, the Republican senator from Tennessee. Not just any Republican senator, by the way. He is the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and he also sits on the Banking and Finance Committee as well. Yesterday, Marco Rubio even tweeted that, well, dictator Maduro can meet with as many U.S. senators as he wants, but, there's not going to be any sanctions relief until he steps down. Well, guess what? Something very, very odd happened, and nobody is paying attention to it. Orrin Hatch came out in a tweet. Now, this guy who's being held there is a Mormon. Now, listen to what Orrin Hatch had to say. I am pleased to announce that after 2 years of hard work, we've secured the release of Josh and Tammy Holt, who are now on their way home to the United States from Venezuela. Over the last 2 years, I've worked with 2 presidential administrations, countless diplomatic contacts, ambassadors from all over the world, a network of contacts in Venezuela, and President Maduro himself. Not Nicolas Maduro. President Maduro himself. And I could not be more honored to be able to reunite Josh with his sweet family, blah, 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 blah. Oh, by the way, I want to thank Bob Corker, and that's, here's the thing. Nicolas Maduro, we've heard Nicolas Maduro before, out of the administration. We've heard Dictator Maduro, or Mr. Maduro, but President Maduro. This is huge. They are now recognizing Nicolas Maduro as the duly elected president of Venezuela. This is their way of doing it without actually having to announce they're doing it. Oh, by the way, and in this picture, isn't that kind of interesting? Strange way of putting those numbers. Just something I thought was curious, but this is what's gone on. This is what's happened. They have been forced to acknowledge that Mr. Maduro is the president of Venezuela, and they will have to deal with him. Now, this story, by the way, in case anybody doesn't know about this guy, traveled down there, Mormon missionary, apparently met some woman online, or when he was in missionary work, whatever, down there, married her, Venezuelan girl, and got charged with stockpiling weapons. This was 2015, 2016. Now, we have heard 3 separate, and maybe 4, administration officials in this country call for armed overthrow of Mr. Maduro. Now they're referring to him as President Maduro. This is not unbelievable that this guy could have been involved in this. Not at all. And the fact that now that he has been acknowledged by the U.S. as the duly elected president of Venezuela, he is now being conciliatory and saying, okay, you can have your CIA operative back. We're keeping the weapons. This is the story they're not telling you. That they are recognizing Nicolas Maduro as the president of Venezuela, as evidenced by this announcement from Senator Hatch. And President Maduro himself. Over the last 2 years, I've worked with 2 presidential administrations, speaking of U.S. presidents, countless diplomatic contacts, ambassadors from all over the world, a network of contacts in Venezuela, and President Maduro himself. And I could not be more honored to be able to reunite Josh with his sweet, long-suffering family in Riverton. This is enormous. Now, here's how they're twisting this on Bloomberg. An American imprisoned in Venezuela has been released and is headed back to Washington after pressure from the U.S. government, President Donald Trump said. Really? The word pressure was used? Maduro was shown shaking hands with Corker, and of course no president title here. Oh, but up here there is. Joshua Holt's release, which hadn't been previously reported, came less than a day after Republican Senator Bob Corker met with Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in Caracas. Oh, wow, I guess they're going to acknowledge it here too. The two were strengthening international relationships. Does that sound like pressuring? Corker then walked out alongside Carabobo State Governor Rafael Lacava, who said to have visited Washington earlier in the year to discuss the release of Holt, a former Mormon missionary arrested in Caracas about 18 months ago after he traveled there to marry his Venezuelan girlfriend. Very strange. Very strange now that they are calling him President Maduro after going out on this tirade saying that he was not legitimate, saying that they weren't going to recognize the results of the election. Even Rubio has changed his tone here. First tweet, any U.S. senator can meet with whoever they want, but no matter how many senators dictator Nicolas Maduro gets to meet with, U.S. sanctions will go away when Maduro leaves and democracy returns. But now he's saying this. Unconditional release was long overdue. Point being, they are going to have to deal with him. And I think what they're going to say is that, well, because Nicolas Maduro did this wonderful, nice thing, now we're going to be able to talk with him, when the real story is this: that the U.S. has failed in Venezuela. The U.S. sanctions have failed. Their attempts to get the military to overthrow Mr. Maduro have failed. And now they're going to have to start calling him President Maduro, and they've already done it. Ecuador, a member of OPEC, announced they're going to recognize the elections in Venezuela. Now, this weekend, the elections coming up in Colombia, they're going to be huge. They're going to be huge because they're saying that the kind of centrist right guy, the pro-government, big corporatist, big globalist guy, has about a 10-point lead. But we'll see about that. If Ivan Duque is his name, running against Gustavo Petro, who is a supporter of Mr. Maduro himself. Also, in Mexico, the leading candidate is a guy who also supports Mr. Maduro. Given the arrest earlier of Martinelli and what he is getting ready to say, I think there are all sorts of games being played behind the scenes that no one is knowing about, no one's being informed of. So this is a giant story that only very recently made the front page, but they're trying to make it seem like it's some kind of a miracle humanitarian thing, when really it is a terrifying development for the U.S. people, because if this goes down and they start subverting the petrodollar, the truth of the U.S. financial system is not only going to be something for the subject of YouTube videos, it's going to come out and people are going to understand that our money is subject to the same forces, if it were not the petrodollar, as the money in Venezuela was. So you take the U.S. petrodollar status away, and us printing money just willy-nilly whenever there's a problem and running huge debts and running huge deficits will cause spiraling out of control inflation just like it would anywhere else. And that's what's coming. So thank you very much, everyone, for the support. Really appreciate it. I'll mention the Patreon thing real quick in passing right here at the end, that put up a Patreon channel, and it is going to deal with recognizing these psychological operations when they happen. That when something comes out that seems too good to be true, or seems like maybe it's not quite something that you would, expect, that more than likely you're being psyoped. And how to dig and how to find out what's really going on, and how to use the tools in search engines to pull up older articles from years ago to show how things have changed. So we'll leave it there. Like, share, subscribe, and we will see you next time.